Wisconsin, his mother, Joyce Annette, who was a teletype machine instructor, and his father, Lionel Herbert Dahmer, a chemistry student. Some sources report that Dahmer was a deprived child. However, other sources suggest that Dahmer was generally a doted child as an infant and toddler by both parents, although his mother was known to be tense and greedy for both attention and pity. As Dahmer entered first grade, Lionel's university studies kept him away from home much of the time. When he was at home, his wife, who suffered from depression, demanded constant attention and spent an increasing amount of time in bed. She reportedly worked herself into a state of anxiety over trivial matters simply to earn appeasement from her husband. On one occasion, she is known to have attempted suicide. Consequently, neither parent devoted much time to their son, who later recollected that, from an early age, he felt unsure of the solidity of the family, recalling extreme tension and numerous arguments between his parents during his early years. Dahmer had been an energetic and happy child, but became notably subdued after a double hernia surgery shortly before his 4th birthday. At elementary school, Dahmer was regarded as quiet and timid. One teacher later recollected she detected early signs of abandonment in Dahmer due to his mother's illnesses, these symptoms of which increased when she became pregnant with her second child. Nonetheless, in grade school, Dahmer did have a small number of friends. From an early age, Dahmer manifested an interest in dead animals. He initially collected large insects, such as dragonflies and butterflies, and put them in jars. Later, he collected animal carcasses, occasionally accompanied by one or more of his friends, either at home or in a nearby woodland. According to one friend, Dahmer dismembered these animals and stored the body parts into jars in the family's tool shed, explaining that he was curious as to how animals fitted together. His fascination with dead animals may have begun at the age of 4. He saw his father removing animal bones from beneath the family home. According to his father, Dahmer was utterly thrilled by the sounds the bones made and became preoccupied with animal bones. He occasionally searched beneath and around the family home for additional bones and explored the bodies of live animals, only to discover where their bones were located. In one instance, Dahmer decapitated the carcass of a dog before nailing the body to a tree and impaling the skull on a stake beside a wooden cross in a woodland area behind the house. During a chicken dinner, Jeffrey Dahmer asked his father what would happen if the chicken bones were placed in bleach. His father was very pleased by that particular question. He was pleased by Jeffrey Dahmer's curiosity, demonstrated how to safely bleach and preserve animal bones. Dahmer incorporated these preserving techniques into his bone collecting. The same year, his mother began increasingly her daily consumption of laxatives and sleeping pills, minimizing her tangible contact with her husband and children. From his freshman year at high school, Dahmer was as an outcast. By the age of 14, he had begun drinking beer in one classmate who inquired why he was drinking scotch in the morning during history class, that the alcohol he consumed was, he called it his medicine. Although largely uncommunicative in his freshman year, Dahmer was seen by staff as a polite and highly intelligent, but with average grades. He was a keen tennis player and played briefly in the high school band. When Dahmer reached puberty, he discovered that he was gay. He did not tell his parents. In his early teens, he had a brief relationship with another teenage boy, although they never had intercourse. By Dahmer's late admission, he began fantasizing about dominating and controlling a complete submissive male partner in his early to mid-teens. And his masturbatory fantasies gradually evolved to his focusing upon the chests and torso of the focus of his fantasies, despite being regarded as a loner and an oddball among his peers. Dahmer became something of a class clown who often staged pranks, which became known as doing a Dahmer. These included bleeding and simulating odd sexual behaviors. By 1977, Dahmer's grades had seriously declined. His parents hired a private tutor with limited success. The same year, in an attempt to save their marriage, his parents attended counseling sessions. They continued to quarrel frequently. When his father discovered Joyce had engaged in a brief affair in September 1977, they both decided to divorce, telling their sons they wished to do do so. In other words, I have a hard time pronouncing that word, A-M-I-C-A-B-L-Y. I can't say that word worth shit, but anyway. His father moved out of the house in early 1978, temporarily residing in a motel on North Cleveland. In 1978, Dahmer graduated from high school a few weeks before his graduation. One of his teachers observed Dahmer sitting too close to the principal's parking lot, drinking several cans of beer. When the teacher threatened to report the matter, Dahmer informed him he was experiencing a lot of problems at home and that the school's guidance counselor was aware of them. That spring, his mother and father moved out of the family home to live with relatives. Dahmer had just turned 18 and remained in the family home. Dahmer's parents' divorce was finalized on January 24th, 1978. His mother was awarded custody of her youngest son and alimony payments. Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder in 1978, 3 weeks after his graduation. At the time, he was living alone in the family home in Bath. Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was almost 19 at the time. Dahmer lured the youth to his house on the pretext of the two young men were drinking beer together. Hicks, who had been hitchhiking to a rock concert in Chippewa Lake Park, Ohio, agreed to accompany Dahmer to his house upon the promise of a few more beers. With Dahmer, as he had the house to himself. According to Dahmer, the sight of the bare-chested Hicks standing at the roadside stirred his sexual feelings. Although Hicks began talking about girls, he knew any sexual passes he made would be rebuffed. After several hours of talking, drinking, and listening to music, Hicks wanted to leave, but Dahmer Dahmer did not want him to. In response, Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell. He later stated he struck Hicks twice from behind with the dumbbell as Hicks sat upon a chair. When Hicks fell unconsciously, Dahmer strangled him to death with the bar of the dumbbell, then stripped his clothes from Hicks' body before exploring his chest with his hands, then masturbating as he stood above the dead corpse. The following day, Dahmer dissected Hicks' body in his basement. He later buried the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard before several weeks later unearthing the remains and burying the flesh bones. He dissolved the flesh in acid before flushing the solution down the toilet. He crushed the bones with a sledgehammer and scattered them in the woodland area behind the family home. Dahmer's second murder was Stephen Duami, age 24. He was murdered at the Ambassador Hotel November 21st, 1987. Dahmer got the victim drunk, then smashed his chest in and attempted to rip his heart out. In a panic, he rushed out to the nearest store and bought a large trunk where he placed the dismembered carcass. Then he took the body back to his grandmother's house and put it in the basement where he could continue to cut it up. After doing so, he put the remains into a plastic bag and threw it out with the garbage. No remains were ever found of Stephen Duami. I apologize for that vehicle you hear in the background. Sorry about that. I can't control that. It's not like I can't walk outside and tell, and just yell, hey, turn that damn thing off. I'm trying to make a video. Sorry about that. The third victim, his name was Jamie Duxtator, age 14. He was murdered at Dahmer's grandmother's house, south of Milwaukee, on January 16, 1988. The victim was drugged, then strangled. His flesh was removed from the bones with acid, and the bones were once again pulverized. His disposal was the exact same method of Stephen Hicks. The next victim was Richard Guerrero, age 23. He was murdered at Dahmer's grandmother's house on March 24, 1988. After having oral sex with the victim, he gave Richard a drink laced with sleeping pills. Then he strangled him. Dahmer dismembered the corpse and disposed of the remains in the garbage. The next victim was Anthony Lee Sears, age 26. He was murdered at Dahmer's grandmother's house on March 25, 1989. He strangled him before dismembering his body. He cut off his head and genitals to keep them as trophies. Then he painted the skull. His next victim was Ray Lamont Smith, age 33. He was also murdered at his grandmother's house on May 20th, 1990. He strangled the victim, then engaged in oral sex with the dead body. Then he dismembered the body and removed the head. The skull within was painted gray and placed into his refrigerator. The bones were left in a tank of acid until the bones were completely defleshed. Then he placed the bones around his apartment as ornaments. The next victim was Edward W. Smith, age 27. He was murdered on 213 Oxford Apartments, North 25th Street on June 14, 1990. He was enticed into Dahmer's lair where he was drugged, then strangled, then dismembered. The remains were placed into acid to dissolve. The next victim was Ernest Miller, age 23. Also on February 18th, 1991. He was drugged and strangled. His cadaver was dismembered and the bones crushed. The skull was kept and the rest was dumped into the garbage. The next victim was Errol Lindsay, age 19, was also murdered at Oxford Apartments on April 7, 1991. Errol was tempted into Dahmer's lair by being offered money to pose naked. He was strangled. Dahmer had oral sex with the dead body before dismembering it. He kept the skull as a trophy. The next victim was Anthony Hughes, age 31, was also murdered at Oxford Apartments on May 24, 1991. Tony was a deaf mute, but was still tempted into Dahmer's apartments by written requests asking him to pose nude. Once inside, Dahmer drugged him and then strangled him. After killing him, he left the body lying around the apartment for a couple of days before the process of dismemberment was engaged. The corpse was left dissolving in acid, where the skull was kept. The next victim is Gonorak Santhamone, age 14, also murdered at Oxford Apartments on May 27, 1991. Gonorak was drugged and experimented on before he was strangled. The experiments were a drill to the skull at the back of his head, injecting it with hydrochloric acid into the front lobes of the brain while he was still alive. Jesus Christ. Such experiments were to create a zombie-like state in order to be in complete control of his victim. The body was dismembered and stored in acid. The next victim was Matt Turner, age 20, was also murdered at Oxford Apartments on June 30th, 1991. With most of his victims, he was lured into Dahmer's chambers, where he was drugged and strangled. The body was dismembered and left lying around the apartment. The next victim was Jeremy Weinberger, age 23, also murdered at Oxford Apartments on July 7th, 1991. He was put into boiling water, injected into his head, and left alive in a comatose state for 2 days. He was later strangled. The cadaver was dismembered and stored in acid. The next victim was Oliver Lacey, was also murdered at Oxford Apartments on July 15th, 1991. As with most of his victims, he was drugged and strangled. During the dismemberment, Dahmer would sodomize the corpse after being stored. His heart was kept in a fridge. The next victim was Joseph Bradhoff, age 25, was also murdered at Oxford Apartments on July 19th, 1991. Joseph was lured into the apartments by being offered money to pose nude. He was then drugged and strangled. The corpse again was dismembered but not completely. The head and torso was kept in the apartment. The next victim was Keeson Sinsamore, age 13. He was also murdered at Oxford Apartments on June. Well, it doesn't say exactly the month and the year. Just 24 hours after moving into his new apartment on North 24th Street, Dahmer was in trouble with the police. He had conned a low Asian boy, age 13, into coming up to his apartment. Once there, Dahmer drugged and molested him, but the boy escaped. He reported the incident to the police, and Dahmer was charged with sexual assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes. He spent 1 week in jail before getting released out on bail. On January 30th, 1990, Dahmer was found guilty, but sentencing wouldn't take place for many months. The next victim was Tracy Edwards, age 32. He was also murdered at Oxford Apartments He strangled him and killed him and dismembered his body and kept his body in acid for several days and stored many body parts for later consumption. Anthony Edwards, age 32, escaped from Jeffrey Dahmer's lair. He is the only survivor. He is also the one that led police to Jeffrey Dahmer's home, and that's when police noticed an incredible foul stench coming from Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. On July 25, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. By August 22nd, he had been charged with a further 11 counts of murder committed in Wisconsin on September 14th. On September 14th, investigators in Ohio, having uncovered hundreds of bone fragments in the woodland area behind the address in which Dahmer had confessed to killing his first victim, they found many bone fragments. Dahmer's trial began on January 30th, 1992. He was tried in Milwaukee for the 15 counts of first-degree murder before the judge, Lawrence Graham, by pleading guilty on January 13th to the charges brought against him. Dahmer had waived his rights to an initial trial to establish guilt as defined in Wisconsin law. The issue debated by opposing counsels at Dahmer's trial was to determine whether he suffered from either a mental or a personality disorder. The prosecution claiming that any disorders did not deprive Dahmer of the ability to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or to deprive him of the ability to resist his impulses. The defense arguing that Dahmer suffered from mental disease and was driven by obsessions and impulses he was unable to control. On February 15th, the court reconvened to hear the verdict. Dahmer was ruled to be sane and not suffering from a mental disorder at the time of each of the 15 murders for which he was tried. Although in each count, 2 of the 12 jurors signed their dissent, formal sentencing was postponed until February 17th. On this date, Dahmer's attorney announced his client wishes to address the court. Dahmer then approached the bench and read from a statement prepared by himself in his defense as he faced the judge. In this statement, Dahmer emphasized that he had never desired freedom following his arrest, and that he frankly wished his own death.